Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your participation in this event. My name is Paul Sherman, and I'm the Director of Programs for SID-W. So I first want to thank all of the speakers for agreeing to help us out today and just speaking with us on this important topic. We really do appreciate your participation and all the work you put into helping us out with this event and making time in your schedules. I would also like to thank, one of whom is our facilitator for today, but I'd like to thank our wonderful work group co-chairs for helping to put this together, Lane Pollock and Emily Janik. We really appreciate your support as always in helping us to put these events together. So I don't want to take up too much more time. I'll just say that we do have more events coming up. We just added 2 new events to our calendar for March. We'll be adding more shortly. So just check out our website. That's where all the updated information will be about those events, but also what else we have coming up the pipeline, including our annual conference coming up in a few months' time, but more on that later. There's not as much to say about that right now, apart from that. So with that, I want to send it over to Lane to get us started today and take us away.
Thank you so much, Paul, and a gigantic shout out and thanks to SID Washington staff for their help and coordination, and also another of several more thanks to our presenters/facilitators today for joining us. I am Lane Pollock. I'm with USAID. I'm a senior learning advisor in PPL and the co-chair for this working group. So thank you to all of you for coming today. It's been a pleasure to serve in this role and to bring folks together to share experiences, also help us all connect with one another, particularly now when those connections are even more important. And speaking of which, I'd like to ask those of you who are joining to take the lead of some of our other colleagues and feel free to introduce yourself, name where you're coming from, maybe role that you play. We'd love to use these forums to really help people connect with one another, particularly now when the technology can be preventative in some ways. And I'd really like to welcome folks to this topic. So just super briefly, collective learning and networks. I want to give a shout out to Kirsten and Michael in particular, who came to us asking, is this something we could talk about within the working group? Emily and I were delighted at the prospect, given the importance of how we can leverage learning networks or leverage networks to bring in varied perspectives, to make better decisions, to make sure that we're collaborating and learning, et cetera. And so we're really, on behalf of Emily and myself, we're delighted to feature this topic in particular. I also know there are a lot of you coming, because some of you told me you were coming, who bring expertise in this area. So I'm hoping that the breakout rooms, the breakout experience and smaller group discussion will enable you to share your experience and examples, as well as learn from our presenters today. So that's really the setup. Maybe if we could go to the next slide. Very quickly, we'll do some introductions. I'm actually going to ask the presenter facilitators to introduce themselves, as well as the kind of focus area they're going to lead in the breakouts. We'll use a little bit of a pair share technique after the breakouts so that you get a chance to at least share your experiences with one other person. So be thinking about your key takeaways. And then I do want to flag that at the end, as with all SID events, we'll have a quick survey that we'd like to get your feedback going forward. So very quickly to touch upon, next slide, just to reframe or to frame kind of the conversation today, we asked 2 framing questions. So first, how can we promote more inclusive learning by harnessing the power of diverse networks, right? And we know that more inclusive learning and more diversity in terms of how decisions get made yield better decisions, yield better intelligence, to use some of Michael's terminology, and really bring better results and better development. Second question, what are some tools and structures to use that make it easier and more effective for people to learn and apply their learning to their work? So building upon that first question within the frame of collective learning and using networks for learning, what are some practical approaches to do that? So I think we'll hear from our speakers and again, hear from all of you about some of those examples. So next slide, Megan. So now I'm really going to hand it to our speakers, but what we're asking them to do is, again, respond to a couple of different things for just a few minutes each before we get to breakouts. Each of the speakers, Kirsten, Michael, and Rocky, will give just a moment of introduction of themselves, an initial response or thoughts in response to the framing questions. And then finally, and very importantly, they will give a little bit of a pitch or a headline talking about the breakout group that they will be leading. So all of you as participants have the task of listening for the breakout group you would like to participate in. We've done this before and I think it's worked very well. What we're asking you to do is to pick one of the groups. And then as you can see on the screen, we've assigned a keyword to each of those groups. So when you have a sense of which group you'd like to be in, we ask you to use your, if I'm using the right terminology, the name banner on your Zoom name to indicate whether you'd like to be in the group with Kirsten, Michael, or Rocky through those keywords. And then our colleagues at SID will work the magic and have you be pulled into those different groups for discussion. And if there's any sorting we need to do or corrections, we can do that. And please let us know if you have a question. But again, by the time they're finished speaking in the next 15 minutes, we will ask you to have made a decision about where you'd like to be for the breakout discussion. So hopefully that's clear. I'll turn my attention to chat as they begin just to see if there's anything I can do to be helpful. But otherwise, I'd really like to turn it over to Kirsten.
Anita?
You want to coach, right?
Yes.
So Kirsten, okay. I think you're up. I heard a little background noise.
Yes, I heard a little. Yes, I got a little distracted.
Right at that moment. Sorry, but yes, Kirsten, over to you.
It's all good. Hi, everybody. I'm Kirsten Tebby. I'm with Collective Mind. We are a startup that was established in late 2019, and our focus is all on networks. I'm the founder of Collective Mind. And again, this focus on networks is all about helping networks and the people that work for and with networks to be more effective and impactful. So we work with networks themselves and provide advisory and consulting, and we provide learning and professional development to people that work for and with networks as well. So to this idea and to the questions that were posed. So when I think about collective learning, I always, with this or with anything, I always start with the why and what does that mean and to what ends. So when I think again about what collective learning is and why we would do learning collectively, I think first about how collective learning is not just learning in a group, but as a collective. So it's many to many instead of one to many. And what I mean by that is it's not just one person sharing their knowledge and expertise and skills and whatnot with, say, a group of people, you know, learners of some sort, but it's many to many in the sense of many people learning from each other in that space, right? And that's the difference between a more typical learning, which is individuals gaining, again, knowledge, expertise, skills, and the collective learning, which is really about helping the collective to learn in order to do certain things together, right? So when I think about collective learning, I also think, again, back to this question of why would we learn collectively? I think about, okay, well, we would learn collectively, not just to improve ourselves as individuals, but because we want to do something together, and the learning is the basis for that. And so when I think about what that is, what it means then to collectively learn and to take that forward, I think of any number of examples of what that could look like. And I think about collective learning as most commonly peer-to-peer learning or knowledge sharing, but I also think about it as collective problem solving and collectively coming up with innovations or solutions, right? That are more than just one person needing a solution or some sort of innovation, but a common problem that we collectively learn and support each other to address. And I think about it also in ways of thought leadership or standard setting, or ways in which we as, you know, colleagues or associates in a space, in a specific field, topical area, try to move that space forward, right? So again, it's collective learning, not just us sitting in a group learning from one another, which is helpful and important, but actually coming together to learn, to share knowledge, to build each other's capacity for the sake of the whole, not just of the individuals. So there's something there to use that cliche phrase, but there's something there about creating something that's greater than the sum of the parts, right? So that's really what I think about when I think about collective learning. And with a focus on networks, then I think about, because that's what I think about how do you structure this and what does that look like? And how do you design a network to both have the pieces in place that it needs to do that collective learning effectively? And then what are the functions that that network undertakes to actually foster that collective learning, including those pieces of, well, what are we learning for? Why we're learning for some additional outcomes that are shared based on shared goals. So again, I think about networks in that way of these are potential structures for doing that, for coming up with shared goals, defining activities together around collective learning, and then achieving those goals together. And, you know, to the point of the first question about diversity in networks, the more richness we have in a network, the more powerful that network is. So it's really about finding practical ways to foster not only the diversity and bringing that diverse range of folks to the table, but then really finding those practical ways of facilitating and coordinating that collaboration. So in my breakout group, if you'd like to join me, we will be talking about those things. So we'll be talking about what does it mean to design and use a network for collective learning, including specifically, how do you set some shared goals? How do you define the functions and activities of your network for collective learning? And then how do you facilitate and coordinate that sort of collaboration, again, for that collective learning and the outcomes you want to achieve through it? So there's my pitch. And I look forward to seeing you all.
Thanks, Kirsten. So Michael, you are up.
Thank you. My name is Michael, and I just heard an ambulance go by. And so if it happens again, you've been forewarned. Obviously, the soundproofing is not as good as I hoped. Let's see. I have as one of my institutional affiliations that I teach at GW Center for Excellence in Public Leadership. And it's a continuing education type specialized center for public sector leaders who, as they move from mid-level managers to executives, move out of their niche of expertise into becoming transdisciplinary. And so it's kind of often no longer being the expert, but becoming an expert collaborator, and how to navigate the transformation or the series of changes and challenges that arise as one deals with different ways of thinking, different ways of doing, different ways of behaving. And so that shapes how I will facilitate the conversation. And although I will start with two specific tools, one is a tool for diagramming together around question one about how to make learning networks more inclusive or diverse. I find that because the brain has 50 to 90% of our processing is visual, and so often by using visual stimuli and visual exercises, people engage more richly. So even if we don't have time to do it, which we will not, we'll at least look at two different kinds of visual activities for thinking together. I'll introduce some terminology for kind of getting mindsets aligned, because often, for example, the term learning we all have an experience of learning, and it all occurs within our brain when it's happening to us individually. But when we're doing it collectively, it is expressed in the agreements between us, or to use a different, instead of using a human example, to use either a beehive or our immune system is maybe an even better example. When an immune system learns, there's no brain coordinating your immune system. There's a series of different roles that have practices between them that learn what are the new viruses attacking you, and so the way in which learning occurs in a meta system is different than what we think of. And so sometimes we have to become clear about what the concepts, how they're different, and what new kinds of vocabulary comes up. And so I'll be talking about that. I'll be talking a little bit about institutions. The way in which humans are organized is primarily, traditionally it's been thought of as either human systems or markets, governments, or hierarchies. And that's often where development design focused. A couple of years ago, the first female Nobel Prize winner, Eleanor Ostrom, identified the participatory commons as a new form, but some would say that techno-intelligence is also becoming a distinct form of human socio-technical intelligence. And all of these have certain things that are unique about them. And so it's like, what are the cognitive tasks that each of these type of systems do? And how to even begin to diagnose them so that they can play better with each other. And so again, it's going to be an impossible conversation, but we'll start by at least talking a little bit about the building blocks. We'll talk about who else is in the room. And if folks naturally want to go in a particular direction versus another, we'll kind of do that. So I think that's enough out of me for now.
Thank you so much, Michael. And in particular, I want to thank again our speakers for not only bringing their content, but their facilitation skills. So I do want to flag again, for those of you who haven't yet, to pick one of these 3 groups to join. We can assign you, so if you don't pick, we will. But if so far we've heard from Kirsten, so you would indicate collective, as some of you have in your name banner. Michael, design, or Rocky, who you're going to hear from in just a sec, you can say youth. So our SID colleagues are working in the background to get those set up. But Rocky, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, everybody. So my name is Rakiétou Hassane Mossi, and I work with CARE International. CARE works around the globe to save lives, defeat poverty, and achieve social justice. We seek a world of hope, tolerance, and social justice, where poverty has been overcome and all people live in dignity and security. So for me, it's pretty simple. So I'm gonna exchange with you and tell you a little bit about how the West African Youth Network was able to interact with some youth in Austria and share together what are the knowledges they know and what are the similarities and the differences also that we can see in the 2 environments. So together, we were able to understand and work together and to learn from each other, which is, I believe, what we're trying to achieve in collaborative learning. And yeah, we'll discuss more about it whenever you join my team or my breakout room. There you go. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Rocky. And I know I'm going to check in with Paul and see how we're doing on assigning folks. I see a few of you have posted those in the chat, so we'll do our best to get folks lined up. But Paul, I just want to check in with you and see how we're doing about give me the sign when we're ready to go. Also, if there's any questions, actually, while we give our SID colleagues a moment to shuffle people. Let me move over to the chat and see if there's any responses or questions that have come out. Sorry, I'm taking a quick scan. I think, Rocky, actually, can I ask you a quick question just to clarify? The example you're going to be sharing is around youth, right? Could you say just a sentence or 2 about that? Because that might be of interest to people as they make this choice, which is very different.
Sure. So I will talk about the CARE Youth Staff Network, how we came about, what is our mission and our goals for CARE Youth, and especially for implementing, because we're talking about our Vision 2030, how the youth will be able to contribute to that and be able to sustain CARE's vision throughout. And then we will also be talking about how learning from others actually will be helping us build and achieve our goals.
Great, thanks, Rocky. Also, I see, Kirsten, there's a question for you in terms of what networks do you work with, if it's private sector, mixed, or education?
Yes, and I was just responding in the chat to that. We work with everyone. We're agnostic to different topical or focus areas and just concerned about the networks themselves and how to understand them and make them more effective and impactful.
Great. Yeah, and if there's additional questions, we welcome those in the chat now. We may also have some time at plenary when we come back to take a look. So those are welcome all along the way. So Paula, I think we're ready whenever you all are ready in terms of assigning folks. And I know not everyone has made a choice, but we may just have to make an executive decision and send folks. I want to make sure our colleagues have plenty of time to have their breakout group discussions. Also, I'll put in a plug. If folks have ideas for future working group conversations, Emily, on behalf of Emily and myself, we'd like to invite those. Okay, so Paul is giving me the thumbs up in background to say we are good to go. So if you're ready to strap on your virtual seatbelt, we are going to move into our breakout rooms. And again, thanks to our 3 presenters / facilitators as we go.